Thanks for joining. And this presentation is about Grava. So it's a new graphical interface to TypeDB. And I just want to take you through some of the key features that are in the works and show some previews, and happy to take any questions you'll have afterwards. So luckily, this was just planned to be a short presentation, so I think we'll be fine for time. First of all, well, the premise for this project is really that tools matter, obviously, and in the area of knowledge graph applications, I myself was looking through some of the available tools a couple of years ago, and it seemed that many of the available knowledge graph applications suffer from some shortfall. Either they're expensive, and that, for instance, Lincurious or Meltigo are some very nice applications, but they're prohibitively expensive for most people to use, running up in thousands of euros a year. They are domain specific, so there are many tools, for instance, for analyzing Twitter graphs, but that's not necessarily what everyone wants to work on. Or they can have other shortcomings, such as not being very suitable for interactive analysis. So Gephi or Cytoscape are great tools, but they're not these integrated interactive tools. And so it became clear that TypeDB is a very powerful and general purpose platform that would allow for building such a visual tool that could be very broadly applicable. And in particular, the data model, which allows for these very concise and expressive queries, the ability to right out of the box do inference, so through rules in Kraken, in TypeDB, to do compute queries and even machine learning through the Knowledge Graph Convolutional Net project. And all of this, of course, is part of the open source offering of TypeDB from Radical. So it's just a fantastic platform. And the project here is really about giving as wide as possible an audience access to this. So who are the target audience for this project, for this app? Well, the name Grava is a bit of a corruption of the Danish word grauer, which is usually used as a sort of within the journalist profession slang word for people who do investigations. And so Grava tries to capture this ethos of people working to do good in society, whether that be investigative journalists, life scientists, or of course members of the Radical community, people who are tuning in today. And that is why we're trying to make this tool sort of broadly easy to use and available to as wide an audience as possible. Now, some of the more specific problems that we're trying to solve is we're trying to, well, there's a very common problem in graph visualization, and it's known as the hairball problem. There have been a lot of ink has been spilled over how to visualize very large complex graphs. And the approach that this project takes is really to say, the way to solve it is to only show what the user is interested in at a given time. So some of the features I'll be showing you shortly are exactly aiming to overcome this problem of too much information on your screen. And that would be through local queries to explore local neighborhoods of nodes, using filtering carefully, and of course, tailoring the visuals to achieve as much clarity as possible. Now, in this presentation, we'll do an example. We'll look at a particular database that was published a few years ago and which has been ported into TypeDB. It's the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists have published several large-scale investigations that have involved huge network-style databases. And we're using one of these databases, the Paradise Papers, published a few years ago, based on leaks from a legal firm, Appleby, and some business registries in different tax jurisdictions in 2017. This is just an example, though, to illustrate some of the power of TypeDB and of this tool. And the idea is, as mentioned, that it could be applicable much more broadly. So first, we're just going to look at how this tool allows you to explore the TypeDB schema that structures your data. So we're just going to look at how you can, for instance, look at the different types in your database. And we're just going to see a short video that illustrates this. So this view is of the schema. And you can select in a hierarchical menu the different types that you wish to appear in the visualization. And you can unselect any that you don't want to see. You can say that you want to have the attributes in there or not. And it just creates a fast and easy way to zoom in on what's most relevant to you, what you want to work on. Now, another useful way to filter the schema view of your database is to filter the links that you're showing. So these links can include things like links between types in your database that are subtypes of each other, but also attributes that are owned by other types, and relations that relate roles, and players that play roles. So that is also something that we can do very easily simply by selecting or unselecting these particular types of links. So again, it allows you to sort of drill down, and here we're just looking at inheritance, for instance. And but then you can also add things like ownership of attributes, as you see here. And we can see one of this type owns some attributes. And it just makes it easier to navigate your schema, which of course is where you'll be doing some of your knowledge modeling. Now we're going to look at the data layer and the sort of queries that this application will allow users to do. Now, if you've tried the Graphical workspace, you will be familiar with just the way it works to just do an ordinary match query to retrieve some particular data. And we're just going to show how it works in this context. It's very similar. You have a menu where you can type in currently a query, and you can select different options, such as how many answers you expect, and it will then fetch them from the database. As you can see, and as you've seen, I should mention, this app allows you to fully customize how your nodes look. So not only color of everything, but you can also add icons for everything to make it nice to look at. Next, we're just going to look at what it looks like when you sort of want to find out information that's inside each of these nodes, and ways you can sort of export it as well. So if you click on one of these nodes, you can see all of its attributes that in this easy menu. You can also, with a view to exporting data, click on several nodes, and then you'll be able to explore them in a table within the application. And you can also copy paste simply the rows from the table. But the idea is really to allow people to say, get some sort of important subset of data points and then put them into a table, export them to Excel or some other format, and then continue working with them in another application, which seems to be a common use case. But back to another type of query, which is where some of the effort has gone in this app, and where we are in particular trying to solve this problem of how do you overcome the information problem that when you have way too many nodes. And this is something we try to overcome by having this local search, where essentially you can from a given node in your database, retrieve neighboring nodes, and you can do so with very precise filters constraining what you get. So in this case, we are clicking on a node. It's an officer within this database, and we only want to see some of the relations in which this node can play a role. And this then opens up only those relations. So we get a limited number of nodes added to the graph from the Kraken database, meaning that it doesn't flood your screen with results, which would make it very difficult to find any sense in it. Now here we can really, very targeted way, go into specific sorts of connections that we're interested in. You might also have noticed that when it retrieved the results, the connections of the results to existing data points that were shown were found. So if you are adding new nodes to your screen, it will find existing connections to anything that you've already rendered, so that you always have a proper picture of the connections between the entities or the relations that you are currently visualizing, because there are no hidden relationships between them that you just haven't explicitly queried for. They will always be shown. Another feature that is very useful in many cases is to be able to edit your data, and that could be because you are working on something more like a small personal knowledge graph that you're building perhaps interactively, or it could be because you are adding annotations to a knowledge graph, and this tool allows you to very quickly add. In this case, we'll just show how we're adding some new data points to the Kraken database just through a sort of a keyboard shortcut, point and click. There we go. Now we're going to add a relation between these two new entities. And the interface has identified the appropriate relation to add in this case. And now we delete the relation because we didn't mean to add it, and it's gone. So this interface allows you to quickly add new data, to delete existing data, and to update data points, which of course is useful in many cases for annotating or for building a database. The final feature for the data that I wish to show is import. So there are some powerful existing tools for importing data from, for instance, delimited files or JSON files into TypeDB. And some of these are very, very powerful, and this app does not aim to replace them. However, it is useful to have an interactive way to import data into your database if it is already pre-processed, and that's what we provide here. So in this case, we just select a CSV file on the computer, and you can see here the different variables within that file. The interface now allows you to match those variables to types within your database. So you can either manually match them just by individually assigning columns to some type in your database, or you can also automatically match things based on a fuzzy pattern matching. In this case, match names, and you'll see it'll populate all the mappings of the different columns in your table to the types in your database. And all you have to do is then click insert, and it will create all of these types, all of these new data points within your database. Great. So that was a quick tour through some of the main features, and some of the things that are brewing. I just want to give a quick impression of what's coming next. features include building and editing the schema. That's obviously an important feature for such an app. There is already a fairly advanced work on the query builder, so allowing you to click through menus to build complex queries, which could be very useful when you don't remember all of the types in your database, or you're not quite sure of all the TypeQL syntax yet. And of course, all of this aims to become a desktop app that you'll be able to download, much like Graphene Workbase, and run locally. The timeline for this development is that later in this year, there will be a free version of this app that so open to the whole Graphene community, sorry, TypeDB radical community, and it will be on the side. There will also be more work to develop some pro features for, in particular, corporate clients, which could include things like having special built-in functions for API calls to retrieve data on the fly, and also things like spatial modeling that will, for instance, position the nodes in space visually and overlay them on some background, so that you can use it to also model things more like sort of geography and similar applications. So all that remains now is just to thank, in particular, Vatical for all the support for the core team, which has just been very invaluable for developing this tool. It's been such a responsive team, and also the whole community of other Vatical developers. It's been really cool to be part of it. I also just want to thank Plotly for providing the Dash framework that is a major part of this app, and Vasco Asturiano, who's the very cool developer who's developed the React Force Graph that powers the visualization of this app. So that is really all I have to say, and I'm very happy to take your questions.